This is Tom, and you are listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in the spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. Getting to Third Space is produced by Tenacious Change, a consultancy committed to creating resilient nonprofit organizations. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now, let's get to third space today. Hey, good morning, Lamar. How you doing?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing well. How are things in Maryland?
Well, you know, they're foggy, rainy, and yeah, it's just what it is. And hey, I got to ask, what kind of coffee you drinking today?
Oh, I'm drinking free trade coffee.
Free trade? But what kind is it? Just free trade, or is it Nicaraguan, or do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
But it's good.
I'm only allowed to drink Colombian coffee.
Why is that?
Why is that? Well, has to do with my wife being from Colombia. And so, but fortunately there's a place around here, Weist Markets.
Oh.
Pennsylvania chain that sells really great Colombian coffee. In fact, it's even got the seal of approval from the Colombian Coffee Federation. And if you don't see Juan Valdez on the can, it's not actually real coffee from Colombia.
Is that true?
That is true. That is true.
Okay.
The Coffee Federation there handles all the exporting of Colombian coffee. And so if you want to know if you're drinking actual Colombian coffee, look for Juan Valdez and a little mountain behind him. And, you know, it's
Cool.
the NLC Colombian Coffee Federation. So there you go.
I'll have to look on the bag of this. So we do coffee beans and we grind them up, and I do French press coffee. That's my favorite. And so, yeah, I'll have to look on the bag. Yeah,
I got too many ways to make coffee. I sometimes use a French press, and while in the middle of the pandemic, I bought an old percolator coffee maker. You know, the kind you used to sit on the stove and percolate. I got one of those. It really makes good coffee. I mean, hotter than Hades too, I got to tell you. But it's really good coffee. But you have to kind of learn the formula, you know.
The formula for making good coffee for me is 2 tablespoons, even tablespoons for every liquid cup of water to make coffee.
So is your liquid cup 6 ounces or 8 ounces?
It's 8 ounces, right? That's what's in a cup.
Well, the coffee cans will say 6 ounces.
Yeah, well, I do liquid out of my little measuring cup that I use in the kitchen.
That's going to be 8 ounces.
It's 8 ounces, and it's perfect. It's perfect for 2 tablespoons. So today I'm at a 6 tablespoon pot of coffee. So
excellent, very good.
Yeah.
Well, I usually make 8 cups of the standard coffee size cups, which is like 8 times 6. That's what, 42. Is that right? 42. Yeah, because
I bet you our listeners will correct us and get it right, right?
Yeah. We probably ought to get down to business in that case. I understand that we got a note from a listener, right?
We do.
So why don't we kick off with that and tell us what the listener has to say?
Yeah, and this was from the last podcast that was dropped a week or so ago. He said, I listened to your podcast regarding space definition. We talked about, water spaces, first, second, and third spaces. A very good podcast, good pacing, balance, and subject. 2 thoughts. When you began the podcast, how had you defined third space for your podcast focus? For your information, I visualize first space as a one-way focus from the ego out. No two-way listening or interaction. I talk, you listen. No other rules. Sometimes that is what the situation calls for. Sometimes it's a pattern. And second space is two-way, but without listening or meaningful interaction. A very low form of interaction. Sometimes this is appropriate for a situation. Sometimes it's the best that can be done. The third space is where the desire and goals are meaningful interaction between two or more. That involves listening, trust, attention to communicate behaviors. Focus on communication to be heard. Of course, there are always more than one way to look at things. I found you guys' thoughts interesting. So appreciate the response. I think that this listener brings an interesting perspective, some things we hadn't thought about. So appreciate listeners responding and letting us know what their thoughts are.
Yeah. So if you got thoughts out there, don't be shy. Send us a note. Send us a note. You can even just send us a voicemail on Spotify. If you listen on Spotify, it gives you that option. You can send us email at lamar.thirdspace, and that's third with the three, third space, at gmail.com, or tom.thirdspace at gmail.com. So send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. So what do you perceive we're doing today, Lamar? What is your perception of what we are doing today?
Feels a little bit like a setup. Very well done.
Thank
but
you.
I think we are talking about perceptions. And what is the difference between perception and reality? Because sometimes they're not the same. Throughout my career, working with people, working in the world of therapy and counseling, working in the world of church work and leadership, it's important to understand that what your perception is oftentimes your reality that drives your feelings and your beliefs and your actions sometimes. Whether or not what you're perceiving is actual or not is another thing. But when I work with people, oftentimes I have, instead of correcting or trying to get to what's real right away, try to work with people with what their perceptions are, how they understand what's going on around them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I was thinking about that too from the perspective of the kind of work that I've done. That we have done a lot of group organizational and community change work, and there's many times there's a competition between perspectives, and a lot of times we will divide the basic perceptions into the perception of what we call a content expert. That is somebody who has know-how to make something happen, and the other is context expertise, which is somebody who knows about the situation that is being changed because they live with it. They deal with it on a daily basis. We think of that as really lived experience. Those two perceptions are critical to really being able to bring change to a community group or organization. And if you don't account for those two perceptions, you may find yourself just completely always at kind of loggerheads in trying to create some change. So I think it's a really interesting topic. I'm glad you introduced it today. Thank you.
Well, I think it's an important thing for all of us to kind of be aware of. Unfortunately, I think it's too easy to just assume that what we're seeing and what we're hearing is factual, or to even assume that what we're seeing and hearing is not factual. It doesn't have a base. It behooves us, I think, as consumers of information, to know how to really spend some time on important issues, determining, what is factual based, what's story based, and what may not have any factual base at all.
Yeah. Well, and in late winter, and we're still in early spring, there were a number of kinds of stories that appeared that we were following and taking note of that really kind of brought around different perspectives, if you will, on this whole issue of perception and reality. And certainly, so I think we're just going to kind of meander and muse on some of these a little bit, and think about, what was a perception, what was a reality. I don't know that we necessarily have any. And in some cases, we don't really know exactly whose perspective was right. But in other cases, it's really pretty crystal clear, right? So So let's maybe take a murky one here, which
Okay,
is
let's do it.
we followed the NCAA women's tournament this year,
Hmm.
and there was a fight that broke out when
That's right.
LSU and USC, that would be University of South Carolina, played each other at the very end of the season. And what was interesting about, I mean, without going into the details of the fight, but a player from South Carolina pushed to the ground a much smaller player from LSU, and it cleared the benches. The referees ended up saying, "Hey, when you came out on the floor, you broke the rules, and so you're disqualified from the game." And so the game ended with only 5 players from USC, I think it was, and only 6 players from LSU
Yeah.
in the over. I think they were in an overtime even, and so there were no subs, and LSU could make one sub, but what was interesting were the comments of the coaches after that, and so what we had on the one hand was Don Staley, the coach of the University of South Carolina, that even in her remarks immediately after the game, she said, "I just want to apologize to the basketball community. This is not behavior that is appropriate." And then there was Kim Mulkey. Now, I will be very honest and say, never been a fan of Kim Mulkey. And part of the reason I've never been a fan is because of the behavior that I saw related to this. And her comment was, "Well, it's really too bad that girl didn't pick on Angel Reese, because Angel Reese would have taken it to her," and yada yada yada. And she was blaming the refs, and I thought, we all saw the fight, and how do these two coaches have such dramatically different takes on it through these two different lenses, and the fact that these coaches also set the tone for how their players behave. It just was, I don't know how that fight strike you, and what do you think is going on here in terms of the perceptions? Is it all drama? Is it all theater? What is it?
Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's theater. I I think it. I think part of it has to do with values. But I don't know about you, but I've noticed, particularly this season and some of last season in the NCAA women's game, I've noticed the level of physical aggression getting and taunting just becoming more apparent.
Yeah.
But we've kind of seen that in athletics just in general as well. But in this particular situation, where you have those who are responsible for setting the tone, setting the narrative, taking vastly different approaches to it. One trying to, what I think, the way I would phrase it, wanting to bring things down into a more of a respectable kind of approach, and another kind of fostering that kind of aggressive attitude. I think that's a good, clear example of two perceptions of what happened and how you respond to it. So my thought is, I don't think it's theater. I think it's real, and I think it's reflective of maybe a culture that's being developed.
Perhaps that's the case, and it's I think it's really unfortunate because those teams are going to meet again because they're in the same conference.
Yeah.
And so what Staley is communicating, this behavior is unacceptable, and we need to be better than this. And what Mulkey is communicating is, we don't have to be better than this. This can be us. And anyway,
so
go ahead.
Here's kind of what we're talking about, though. Is your question, was this theater or was this real? there's a point where reality is what we create. And even if someone doesn't believe something, we can talk about beliefs and we can talk about perspectives, but even if someone doesn't believe something, if they put it out there enough, it becomes a reality. And
Yeah.
particularly for those who are seeing that or even a part of it. So if I have a team, for example, or a group of people I'm responsible for, and I use in this case, if I continue with the accusations and the challenges, even if I don't believe that, or even if I don't think that's reality, those that I'm influencing do, and that becomes their reality, and that
Mm-hmm.
becomes how they behave. And if the expectation is, hey, wait for the next time to happen, and I expect you to take somebody down,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I had said before, that then becomes a very real thing, regardless of whether that is a belief that a coach in this situation actually had. That's how they presented it, and then that becomes um, the behavior that follows.
Yeah. I have to say too that after seeing that, I thought if I had a daughter that was
Mm,
an elite basketball player going off to college, I'd want her to go play for Don Staley before I'd want her to go play for Kim Mulkey. You know, I,
understandably.
I just, yeah, I was just appalled by the behavior. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So that kind of introduces our topic of perception versus reality.
Yeah.
How real was real in that situation, and I think, but I really like the point you make that if we put it out there long enough, then it begins to become real. And unfortunately, we're also seeing that happen in the political realm too.
Sure.
You know, so
Absolutely. And we're seeing it in a lot of different scenarios around us. And I think that you know recently we saw that. I go back again to the NCAA women's basketball. The Utah team,
oh
uh, was harassed with racial slurs as they were out going to dinner, and you know something that I listened to their coaches' feedback on that, and it in the college that they're attending, that's not the environment that they experience. But
right,
getting into another environment, another geographical area, suddenly they're confronted with something that is totally foreign from what they were experiencing at college, and it's like not even sure how to respond. So it what perception is and what reality is, and in a situation like that, such a terrible example of communicating and interacting with people um, in a way that is so hurtful and degrading, not even sure how to respond, and necessitating a physical move of location to another hotel to get away from that kind of thing. I think that we just have to be aware that the things that we say matter, the
mm-hmm.
way we interact with people matter, and we need to be very thoughtful, I think, about what's behind what we say and what we do.
Yeah. And of course, all of this, it kind of places in context. We're
Yeah,
delving into this because when we're trying to engage people in conversations, we have to acknowledge that there's going to be a perspective
hmm,
on the dialogue that's occurring that is different from ours. And we also have to understand that there's a possibility that even the reality that we understand to be true may be different. And that's a whole nother level of complexity when it comes to really having a civil dialogue with somebody. And we did see that in kind of the political realm recently too with the State of the Union speech. Not the State of the Union itself, but with the response to the State of the Union. And I want to be
right.
respectful of the fact we try really hard not to be partisan in this podcast. Um, and we raised this only because the response to the State of the Union by Republican Katie Britt was found to be highly problematic by both Republicans and Democrats. And part of that had to do with a story she told, which was patently false in how she related it, and the perception she tried to create around that. Lamar, you maybe have a better memory and handle as to what that story was, and if you do, I'm gonna can you refresh my memory on that?
Well, I think the gist of the story had to do with uh, recalling a conversation that she had had about with someone who had been sex trafficked and sexually abused and molested over a period of time while in captivity. The implication was that this happened during Biden's administrative time and it
Yeah,
happened in the U.S. And both of those things were incorrect. It, this is where perception and reality in information that we as consumers get is really important. I go back to this, it's on us to not just bite into that and believe it hook, line, and sinker, because it happened years before the Biden administration. It also did not happen in the U.S. as far as I understand, but it did happen. But using a situation that and implying that it's related to something else is definitely a form of manipulation.
yeah,
Now, manipulation is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's how it's used.
yeah,
If it's been transparent manipulation, etc., we can get into that here in a little bit. Um, but in this case, uh, there was no explanation behind it. There was no factual information to lead the consumer of that presentation to understand. Oh, yeah, this didn't happen in this administration. This didn't happen in this side of the border, which would have changed how we responded to it, if that makes sense.
yeah. Well, and I think that the and now I'm remembering it more clearly. I just kind of went blank there for a second, but the the fact is, there was a young woman. She was now in her 30s that Katie Britt spoke to, and that young woman told her about her own experience of being sex trafficked in Mexico, not in the United States, uh, and it happened years ago, not when there was a Democratic president, but when there was a Republican president in office. And the presentation of that was to make it seem as if this happened just in the last 3 years, 3 to 4 years, which was not true. And and the other thing that I found particularly disturbing about the story was how graphically she presented it. I remember it being, I just kind of, it was blood curdling in a sense, in terms of how she presented it. And I thought, this does not fit with a person who also presents herself as being very concerned about the moral climate in our country. That I don't offer that as a judgment on Katie Britt. I'm just saying that something, it didn't seem congruent. She's wearing the cross, she's acting like a mom, she's talking about all these very positive things, and then this horrific story comes tumbling out of her mouth, and it felt, I guess the only word I can give it is creepy. It felt creepy to me, and borderline offensive.
Absolutely. I think that's a good assessment. I'm not, again, I'm not particularly siding one side or the other here as far as the political side. I'm looking at information.
Yeah,
If we're going to have a dialogue, if we're going to have communication that is about really important issues, and we're trying to get to a conclusion or an agreement or at least an understanding, I have to be able to trust what you're saying is valid, and what you
absolutely.
have to be able to trust me. Now, I can make mistakes. That's different. If I make a mistake and I'm corrected, then that's on me, and I need to
Right.
own that.
Right.
But if I'm using a methodology that leaves out important information or sets implications in place that I know are going to be taken a certain way,
Yeah.
that I have to be responsible then for creating, just like in the LSU USC fight, I have to be responsible for creating a narrative that impacts other people in negative ways.
Yeah. 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 Well, and not only does it impact the person listening to the story and what they believe to be true
Yeah,
about it, it impacted the woman that it happened to,
yeah,
because now this is put out there, and and she is found by the press, and she says, this is why I don't like to talk to politicians about this, is because the story
hmm
gets taken and twisted and used. And I thought, how incredibly sad. I mean, we don't tell each other stories. Now, sometimes we feel like maybe we should or could, if we're close enough in relationship. But I try really, really hard not to tell my wife's story. I
hmm
try really hard not to tell my children's story. Uh, but wow, I mean, that just that felt so unethical at so many levels.
So
Uh,
I think using that term ethical is an important maybe transition for us to think about. When we're working with people and each other and we're working with information, here's where ethics become incredibly valuable. And I
mhm,
would even say we have been amiss at holding people to ethical standards.
mhm,
Um, you know, and what are ethics? Being honest, transparent, um, you know, being clear, etc. And we could go down. Maybe that could be something we do in a podcast to talk more about ethics. Um, you and I have talked back and forth in the last couple of weeks about a photograph
yeah,
that was taken years and years ago. And many people will remember this photograph of um, workmen who were uh, having lunch. I think there were 11 people lined up on a I-beam over New York City having lunch.
yeah,
And that photograph has been uh, touted as kind of an example of the spirit of the working person in the U.S. And it's a very
yeah.
famous photograph. And I love the photograph. But really, we learned some things about that photograph. Um, it's it was a stage photo for a for the company who is doing the real estate development in that area, to 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 demonstrate that the real estate was being developed, and the working person is to be valued, and the economy is to be considered to be coming back, and all of those messaging. It was, there were photographers who were lugging up huge cameras that had glass negatives. I mean, this is old time stuff. So it really took place on top of the building as it was being built, many stories up. Um, but they staged it to take the photograph. They took many photographs. There were three different photographers, in fact, in that particular day. Took many photographs, um, and most of those photographs were staged. They have, uh, but yet, does that mean that that photograph uh, is suspect or shouldn't be seen for what it is? It's the message behind it. So initially used as a marketing tool, which is fine.
Mhm.
But later, over time, if the story changed, and that story that I heard was as an actual, someone took a photograph of some guys who were having lunch, and that actually wasn't the case. Um, So it has to do with story, and we can get facts, or we can present information in a way that um, tells our story, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's factual, but it's representative. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it does. And of course, that's part of what got Kate Middleton into trouble,
That's right.
with the family photo that she took. And you know, was it factual? Was it representative? Well, don't know. But unfortunately, for her, there has been so much mystery swirling around her illness and her surgery and all of that.
Right.
And it put her in a position where she really had to come out and say, "Hey, look, um, I had cancer, right?
Hmm.
And I'm being treated for cancer." And at that moment, that was really interesting to see kind of this collective shame that people felt around, harassing her on the internet and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And I think that, whether you're a Royal fan or not, a Royals fan or not, I don't mean Kansas City Royals, and I
Okay.
mean
I
the
am, but
British
that's all right.
Royals. uh, whether you're a fan of the British Royals or not, you have to just kind of feel for her in that situation.
Yeah.
That she's trying to say, "I'm okay. It's going to be okay. Here's a picture of me on Mother's Day with my kids, my family." You know, playing with the photo a little bit, and I'm trying. Lamar, I got to say, how much time do people have if they're sitting there trying to figure out, oh, look at that, that sweater's not aligned perfectly.
Yeah.
It must be a fake photo. It's like, you know, I'm sorry, but maybe you need to get a life. I mean, for God's sake.
True.
But but what that triggered, though, of course, was her having to come out and really
Hmm.
say, okay, this is the fact.
Yeah.
You've had all these perceptions going around. Let me tell you the fact.
But
I've
she's
got
also an
cancer.
amateur photographer.
Right.
I mean, a
Right.
very good amateur photographer,
Yeah.
and she took the opportunity to clean up her photograph.
Yeah.
Now, how much she cleaned it up, I don't know. But those who are doing what we call pixel peeping, looking into the fine detail, find a few things here and there. A sweater's not matching exactly. The steps and the stones on the floor, they're not aligned properly. Um, all things that would point to that the photograph was, altered in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think that the fact that they released that as an official Mother's Day photo might suggest that it would have been good to be able to say, "Hey, here is a photo with minor alterations."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's all hindsight. Typically, I assume that most family photos that I see are altered one way or the other. To be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Well, and actually, all you gotta do is look at that photo and know it was staged anyway. I mean,
Oh yeah, I
you
wrote
know,
smiling.
yeah. And so that raises this question that I have for you, Lamar. I know you're a
Oh,
photographer. You're a
I
very
am.
fine photographer, and if people haven't been
Thank
to your
you.
website to look at your photographs, they really should. Except for the pixel peepers, they probably shouldn't. But I love that, pixel peepers. That's good. So, Lamar, do you
Yeah.
stage or do you fake your photographs?
Um, you know, this is one of those questions that attorneys hate when you're in cross examination. That is, it depends. And yes, so the photography is basically a process, and so it's a process using a tool. The tool is the
Yeah.
camera and the lens and all of that. And if I want to go outside and I want to take a picture of the trees that are blooming out in my backyard, for example, I'll
Mm-hmm.
take it out there. I'll set my adjustments to get a good exposure, and I make the shot. And it's
Yeah.
fairly representative of what's going on in my backyard. But understand that my camera has a computer built into it with algorithms that will adjust lighting, tones, colors, and all of those kinds of things. And so there's already manipulation happening the moment I take a photograph. Same thing happened back in film days. Depending on the film you loaded your camera with,
Mm-hmm.
those things things were compensated for.
Yeah.
So that's the basis that I think we have to understand is everything. It's not 100% representative, but what I do, it depends on
Well,
what my
do you
goal
mean
is.
it's
Go
not
ahead.
100% factual, or?
That's a really good way to put it. It may, if I'm really going to talk about facts, the color rendition may not be what it actually appears to be to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just depends on which
Yeah.
camera I'm using. I'm a Canon guy, so I use Canon, and it has a certain color rendition that is different than Nikon, different
Yeah.
algorithms. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, and so, if you want to say factual in the sense of is it the same as what you and I see with my eye? No, it's not.
Yeah.
And so I have to do something about that.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's the other part of it is okay. Now I've got it on my computer. What am I going to do with that? If I'm taking a picture of you and your wife, and there's a stray hair or two going across your face, I'm going to go in with one of my tools. I'm going to take that stray hair out because it's distracting.
Mhm.
I'm not going to switch heads. Okay. But I could do that with the tools that are available these days.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so I try to represent as much as I can, take minimal distractions out. So yeah, I am manipulating the photograph.
Mhm.
Um, Another example could be I really work hard at doing some fine art photography. Fine art photography for me is about I have an idea, something I want to capture in this photograph. And so I think about how I want to stage, just like they did in the photograph with the guys having lunch on the I-beam, how I want to stage the photograph to to capture the idea or the story I'm trying to share. I've
Yeah.
shared some of that with you, some of those
Yeah.
staged photographs. I'm working with a person right now. I'm trying to get a photograph that goes through a window of this person sitting having coffee at a table, and my story is that this person, and I know this person very well, and as part of the story that she has is times are tough, trying to figure out what my next move is. I need to contemplate. And so that's what's going through my mind. I'm trying to capture,
Yeah.
but I'm hanging a window from my studio. I'm shooting through that window, at a table that I've set up the lighting, and so I'm creating a story.
Yeah.
So is it factual? No,
Yeah.
um, but it's a story. Here's the thing: when I present that picture, um, I don't put a lot of context. I don't write, well, this is a manipulated picture, or this is a picture that I have created the story about. I will give it a title, and the title might be something like, that might refer to the fact that this person's in a tough spot, has a difficult decision to make. I may just title it contemplation, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
But I don't share all of the things that I've manipulated to create that photograph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. And while you were talking about that, I was thinking about, every now and then you'll come across the internet. See what these celebrities look like when they're not in makeup, you know,
Yeah.
which is really quite fascinating. And the reality is that when I'm out in public, people see me and they don't really understand that in truth I'm Matt Damon.
Yeah, I know that, of course. Yeah.
But I'm just out of
But
makeup, right?
doesn't it go to your credibility? It goes to our credibility, how we present ourselves. I started teaching a series a while back, getting towards the end of that series here locally. And before I started this series, I did an introduction, and I felt the need to introduce myself. And these are people
Hmm.
I know, okay? But there are
Hmm.
things about me they didn't know. They didn't know, some of my background. They didn't know why I might be saying some of the things I say as kind of a foundation, so I don't have to explain it on the run. So
Right.
I took that opportunity to give a background on me, my thoughts, my experiences, my education, as it applies to what they're going to be hearing in the next 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, I felt that that was credible rather than just, them wondering or me throwing something out in the moment. There are ways that I think we can present ourselves in a responsible, accurate way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So Lamar, I mean, I just got to say, this is the fun thing about actually doing these recordings from home. I hear your dog Jake in the background, and he's
I
shaking.
know.
I think that's like the third time he shaked. And but it's so great because Jake is he's such a cool guy. But
He is.
but
Maybe I'll share a photo with you. You can share with the folks
oh,
sometime about
okay, yeah.
Jake.
Well, every time Jake shakes, we'll drop the photo in or something. But yeah, he is such a cool dog. Um, yeah. So this whole so it feels kind of like you've broadened the conversation a little bit here, a
Yeah.
little bit in terms of this whole thing around credibility, uh, and and um, and when we are in civil conversation or dialogue with somebody, we have to be willing to be credible. And sometimes establishing that credibility is to do exactly what you did with your group, which is to say, this is who I am. And I want you to have this body of information because it'll help you understand why I'm saying some of the things I'm saying.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's a really valid way to approach it. And it then does allow you to open that door uh, in a more thoughtful way to say, therefore, if this is who I am and this is what my experience is, this is what is important to me. And this is why it's important to me. And this is what I really believe about this. So I think unless we are able to do that, unless we're willing to establish our credibility and it's really through honesty and
Mhm.
transparency and
Right.
trusting the other person enough with that information, it's going to be really, really hard for us to have a really good civil conversation and dialogue. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that if we're saying we want to get to this third space, especially on this, if we kind of get back to that concept, I can't go. I don't feel like I can go into that conversation or into a environment for third space where I don't trust you, or I don't care about I don't care about what I share having a factual base, but maybe it's something I've heard from somebody else. Or let's go back to that photograph of the guys in the I-beam, where I come into our conversation saying, and I think I've maybe even have done this, saying, "Hey, did you know that was a fake photo?" Well, in a fake photo, I'm thinking they were sitting in a studio. That was a background that they put into the photograph. If I come into our conversation that way, then my credibility goes down unless I find that I've made a mistake and own that mistake and came back which I think I did in our conversation. I came back, well, wait a minute. What I heard about that is not accurate. It's actually a staged photo, and that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I'm in a conversation third place, I need to own what I'm saying. I need to own what the basis of my beliefs are, so that we can have an honest exchange to get to where we need to go.
Yeah. I just had another thought on this whole staging versus faking, right? And taking it out of the realm of photography.
Okay.
But we know that in the political arena, um, candidates and will stage what they say. I mean, there's staging in the sense of the visual, but there's also
Yeah.
staging in terms of the audio and what you're saying and how you're saying it and all of that. And I'm going back to something you said earlier in this conversation, that part of the problem of perception is that if we if we say it enough, it becomes reality. And
Right.
that's the danger we're facing right now, is that when we hear rhetoric, um, and we're hearing a lot of it from one party in particular right now, but let's be clear that the rhetoric can come from either party, and
Oh,
at
yes.
various times has come from both parties. But right now we're hearing a lot of rhetoric that is just it's just dangerous. we're that when we're talking in really negative ways about people, and the fear that I have over the next few months is that rhetoric, some people will easily say, well, it's just rhetoric, that's all it is. But not everybody takes it as just rhetoric. And
Mm-hmm.
my fear is that as we get closer to November this year, we're going to see more people acting on words that are being spoken, and in both parties, I mean, it's easy to point right now to one in particular, because of just the personalities involved. But I would hope that for both candidates in both parties, that everybody really thinks about what it is they're saying, and how people may interpret that and take it, and how
Mm-hmm.
that perception might become the reality for a person, and they act in some very negative ways on it.
You know, what has been really sad for me over the last, I don't know, 6, 7 years pre-pandemic, um, has been kind of the lack of responsibility taken for what we say.
Yeah.
Um, and I own that too. I really, times where I misspeak, or times where I say things knowing that I haven't really um, given the proper foundation
Yeah.
for what I'm saying. So what's saddened me has been that we're thinking more about how we get to where we want to go versus how we get there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's okay to manipulate. It's okay to say things that we know are going to be perceived a certain way, as long as the outcome is the outcome that we want. Um,
Yes.
and so that, to me, that has built a tremendous amount of distrust in the consumer, in the population,
Yeah.
on all sides and all perspectives. Is you can't trust. I mean, you can't trust what you read. You can't trust what you hear on the news. You can't trust what the politicians are saying. You can't trust what your local folks are saying. We had a good conversation with a local representative. I felt that it wasn't about politics specifically, but it was about being in that world. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, we'll have a couple of more coming up here that help us kind of get into some of those issues. Um, but I think that being held accountable and having the ethical perspective, or the ethical sense, to make sure what you're saying is truly understood and has a basis to it, is important. And that's what I feel has been lacking. And
Yeah.
it's sad to see that happen.
Yeah. It is. And I've lived long enough to know that not one party is greater to blame than another.
I don't. That's
And
right.
it's there's a part of me that just would like people to say, let's just stop doing this, period. And run on your merits,
Mhm.
not on how well you can tear down the other person.
So the topics that we've kind of explored today, they've been
Hmm.
they've been they've kind of been around this whole idea of perspective
Yep.
and fact, information sharing, transparency or lack thereof. I'm kind of curious about those who carry the responsibility of their job is to share information. I mean,
Oh yeah.
in the near future, we're going to have the opportunity to talk with a journalist and
Yes.
find out a little bit about how this plays out in a job where your role is to share information as accurately and as factually as possible, without undue influence. I mean, that's going to be an interesting conversation I look forward to. Um, but there's a lot of other ways that this kind of plays out. It plays out in the religious world. It
Hmm.
plays out not, certainly in the educational world. Um, education is one of those things where it depends on your perspective as to the message that you want to bring to the classroom. How do you do that in a way that is respectful of history and facts and um, managing data properly? Because you and I both know that we can do research, and we can do research in a way that is skewed, or we can do it in a way that just lays it out and says, "Here's what we found."
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And in preparing for this podcast, one of the things we talked about was, what is the difference between research and journalism and opinion? And what we kind of landed on was, we said, well, pure research is something that can be replicated. That
Mm.
when a researcher does it, um, it should be possible for other researchers to come in and take that, their methodology and their questions, and replicate it and get to see if they get similar results. And if they don't get the same results, then maybe the population is wrong, or maybe they just, didn't, maybe there was a problem with how they actually executed it. But at least it's replicable. And with journalism, we understand really good journalism to be research based. I think one of the things that is so interesting, that and when I first went to college, I thought I was going to be a journalist. So I ended up
Mm.
taking two or three journalism courses at Southeastern Community College, there in Burlington, Iowa. And one of the things that stuck with me at that point, that was very interesting, that I didn't realize would come back around in some other ways, is that really good journalism has to be verified. You
Mm-hmm.
just,
That's right.
because of plagiarism, because of slander, because of those things, the liabilities that journalists carry, you really can't just put out there anything you want to put out. You have to check it, fact check it, double check it, make sure that what is out there is as accurate and as true as possible. And I think we have somehow lost that, because what has
Mm-hmm.
replaced it is opinion.
Right.
And the opinion of talking heads on TV, and the opinion of writers. And I mean, let's face it, the reality is, Lamar, is we are doing opinion here, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. We're doing some light research. We're looking at some
Yeah.
things. We're looking at pieces come along. But the reality is that we are offering this as opinion, which means that anybody that wants to can disagree,
Yeah.
and they can offer a different opinion. But we're going to be upfront with people and say, this is our opinion. We're musing about this. We're
Mm-hmm.
meandering around the topics. We're not saying this is the only truth.
No, and I think that that's important for us to make sure we don't present ourselves as experts in this area that we're musing about. Uh, how many times, I can't tell you how many times that I have had um, people that I've had conversation with saying, "Listen, I did my research, and here's what I
Mm.
found." I said, "Well, tell me about it. I'm really curious about the research you did." And what I hear is, "Well, I went to a website," or you know, um, my favorite, my favorite person that I read said this, and
Yeah.
so I think we've interchanged the term review with research.
Mm-hmm.
And both you and I, and many others who listen to this podcast, have been steeped in research and what that actually means. It's a systematic process. Like you said, it needs to be replicable, and it has variable management, and it has statistical analysis. And you come in with a hypothesis that you're wanting to know is supported or not supported. If my
Oh, you
hypothesis
psychologists are such good quants.
if my hypothesis is not supported, I have to be able to say, okay, I need to back up here
Yeah.
and rethink what I'm doing. Now, that whole process to me has validity to it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if I want to do a literature review, if I want to go through and see, what do my favorite people say about a particular thing, that then becomes purely opinion and a review of other people's thoughts and ideas. And I just need to present it that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to own it that way rather than holding on to this as factual, if that makes sense.
And also, so I just sat on I've been a part of a dissertation committee, and we just
Okay.
had the dissertation defense yesterday, and it was a brilliant dissertation. I just want to say it's one of the very few that you
Great.
approve without any changes. I mean, it was
Cool.
really, really good. The other thing about a literature review that people are not doing is, yeah, you can review what's out there, but are you reviewing it critically?
Hmm.
Or are you simply just saying, okay, so and so said this, therefore this must be true? Well, in a real literature review, you're reviewing it critically and you're identifying the strengths and the weaknesses, and you're drawing upon that to allow it to inform your own opinion, but it's not without examining it and really raising questions about it. So maybe this person over here in the review said one thing, but 12 other people have a different understanding of it. So now you have to evaluate, is this person being really innovative, or are they, have they gone off the rails? Because if they've gone off the rails and you have 12 other very credible sources over here that are saying something different, you're going to want to stay with the 12 other credible sources. So yeah, wow. I don't know, Lamar.
Yeah, I think we definitely have come to a point of in this particular cast of making. I think we've made our point with our opinions, and what we're seeing needs to be examined critically.
Yep.
And I think that understanding that people bring different points of view, and sometimes that point of view is or perspective is put out there as a way to change the narrative.
Yes.
And I think it's important to understand that and to see it for what it is. And it's also really important, I think, not to buy into every perspective that people that you admire or think about are putting out there. Think about it. Take a look at it. Be skeptical in a healthy way of what's being said.
Well, I would agree with that. And I would just add one thing. They can always, of course, trust our opinions.
I hope so. Our goal has been to be as honest and straightforward as we can.
Yes.
And you know what? Maybe next week we'll change that opinion here in a bit. Who knows?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, hey, it's about that time, Lamar.
It is.
Great to see you again, and the conversation will continue. We probably have more to do with this in the near future.
Absolutely.
It's sorting fact from fiction, reality from perception. It's a never-ending task in these days. So, all right, see you next time, man.
All right, take care.
Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.